Welcome everyone to the first review for the March 2019 Photography Challenge entitled Fill the Frame. This is something new that I'm adding to everybody that submits images for the monthly photography challenge. And what I'm going to do is go through the images and just give a basic critique on each one of the images, and then I'm going to announce the winner at the end of the review. Now, these reviews are just meant to help you get better. I don't want you to take these personally. They're just meant to help you see what I'm seeing, and I'll try and give you a few tips along the way, especially when we talk about lighting and composition and things like that, things that impact our images on a daily basis. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first image here, a horse eating out of something there, maybe eating hay, maybe eating grain, something like that. Initially, when I look at this image, I'm not impacted immediately. The colors right off the bat for me are a little desaturated. I do like what the maker's done with this image though, really stopping down that aperture. And what I mean by that is they've used an aperture of like f11, f16, maybe even f18 to get that sun flare in the back here. I do like also in the composition how my eye first is hit by the horse and then travels back towards the sun. Past that though, it's not that impactful, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think you could have, for this maker, I think you could have increased the impact by choosing a different perspective and perhaps even going on the opposite side of the horse. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here we have somebody that is going to throw the saddle over the horse. I like that turn, that bend back in. It's a centered composition, so I'm immediately drawn right to the subject. But what's taking me away from the subject is up here in the top third of the frame, we have these beams that are these 2x4s that are really glowing from that doorway light. What I would recommend to the maker of this image is either burn those down, maybe half a stop so that they're not drawing attention away. And then compositionally speaking, I probably would have chosen something just slightly different to accentuate that saddle going over, especially when we're using a wide angle lens. While the subject does take up, in terms of space, I'd say, maybe a third of the space here, I would have gotten in just a little bit closer and gotten that movement of the rider throwing the saddle over. Now this is a great composition, something that impacts me immediately. I'm drawn right up the calf's leg, right up to the cowboy, and then on either side we have two different visual elements that add interest to this image. While the angled horizon line gets me, what would happen if the maker straightened this horizon line out is they would end up cropping out the calf's leg here, which I feel adds to the overall composition of this image. But one thing that I'm struggling with in this image is it's soft. If I double click on this image to zoom into 100%, I'm not seeing a great deal of sharpness in this image. And I'm actually struggling to find where the focal point was in this particular image. And I can't point that out immediately. Sometimes what happens when we're out on location, I know this has happened to me a couple times, is I'll end up putting my camera in the predictive focusing mode called, for Canon, it's AI Servo. And what happens in there is I go to take a picture like this, and Servo is off somewhere else, maybe on the horse, maybe on the cow, maybe on the background, but my overall subject isn't sharp. I do like this overall composition. I like how there's detail all the way through, especially in the darks and even in the highlights, where some of this right in here on his leg would be some of the brightest parts of the image, and even down here on the face. And we still have detail there, so kudos to the maker of this image for keeping the balance between the highlights and the shadows, especially on a day like today, where on this particular day, where they had some really strong light coming in. Wow, very impactful image here. Light exactly where you want it to be, especially in a portrait where it's on the person's face. Added visual interest with, of course, the revolver and then the smoke coming out of the barrel of the gun. If the smoke was added in Photoshop, I would really, I'd really commend the maker of this image for keeping consistency in the lighting direction. In other words, the light primarily is coming from right to left, camera right to left, and that smoke is also consistent with that light pattern, where sometimes when people add smoke in Photoshop or add anything in Photoshop, additional elements, they're not paying attention to the light's direction in the primary image. So kudos to the maker on this image for following that. I would even tend to believe that smoke was not added in Photoshop. But using a wide-angle lens, very gutsy with this kind of composition, especially on a portrait. So well done to the maker of this image. Everything is sharp through and through, exactly where it should be. And this non-confrontational portrait where the person is looking away from us, we consider that non-confrontational, versus if the subject was looking at us, it'd be confrontational, where we are challenged to look back at our subject. Well done to this maker. Okay, on this particular image, my eye travels from left to right from the blurriness, and I try and figure out, what this is immediately. Obviously knowing that it's a horse, and then there's a hard stop visually for me right here at the waist and the legs, which leads me to believe that in this center area right here, where the romal is, where the saddle is, saddle pad, it leads me to believe that this is the interest of the image. And if that is the case, I'm not sure why. So I don't believe that's $1 million saddle, but if this is in fact the focal interest of the image, I would want something more compelling here. And in addition to that, as the rider's foot is cut off down here, I probably would have changed perspective and dropped down just a little bit more. My recommendation to the maker of this image would actually be to swap the focal point, or where your focus is, and that would be make the horse's face the focus and drop everything else out of focus over here, unless this is, there's some compelling reason that the rider's leg and waist and a little bit of tack is in focus. Otherwise, my overall recommendation here is just swap the focus and put the focus on the horse's face and drop everything else out of focus. Wow, this is well thought out. The maker of this image has taken care to place everything where they want it to be, and then come back and created that image. And I know these images well. In fact, I posted one on my blog if you guys want to take a look at that. It's called Bit and Spurs Beginning to End, and it's very similar to this in that everything is so deliberately placed in the image that there's no accidents here. I can definitely see that there's been some Photoshop added to this, which is fine. This isn't a Photoshop challenge at all. And I really want to read what's on this page, and I'm kind of turning my head to see that. But a couple things. hit me here. Number one, I'm immediately drawn back here to the lantern because it's the brightest spot in the image, and our eyes tend to go to the brightest spots of an image immediately. But what's conflicting for me here is the main focus is on the pipe resting on this tin. And while that's not prominent, it is prominent from a focus standpoint, but it's not prominent from it being the brightest part of the image. And it's not to say that that always has to be the case, but in this case, I feel like my attention is being drawn away from where it needs to be, and I feel like it needs to be right on this corncob pipe with this tin and everything else supporting it. The other thing here is we got some natural light bleed, so this is probably high ISO, slow shutter, and we're getting this blue coming in from what would be a window, probably to the left here. And for something like this, if we're going to add some visual interest back here via making that lantern a little warmer, what we would see then in Photoshop is just some bleed onto this green bottle over here. So it's just barely hitting the rim, but that's more from that backlight over here. So nice job to this maker. This is a really compelling image, and I give you all the credit in the world for setting this whole thing up. Kudos to you. I know how these images go, and here's another tip for you. You could do some focus stacking here and make the foreground, while this is in the corncob and the tin are in the foreground, what you could do is some focus stacking. And what I mean by that is you put the focal point right here, take a picture. You change the focal point and maybe put it here on the notebook, and then take another picture, and then maybe get the lantern a little bit more in focus. This is purely a creative decision on your part. And if you do try that, I can tell you that it is challenging going through that focal stacking, but well done on this image. Okay, definitely an image that we've all seen before. Hard light coming in from left to right. What I would tell you is this: change your perspective. Use of a wide angle lens really lends itself to accentuating your subject, and especially when it comes to horses, or even people for that matter, we can actually have fun with this. So for this particular image, what I would recommend is pay attention to your sharpness, and number two, pay attention to a more compelling perspective where perhaps you drop down just a little bit. Great. Great image. Ranch dogs, calves, cowboy, alley, the whole 9 yards. Yeah, pretty good. It makes me laugh, and that's a good thing. Here's your center of interest right here. Maker is using a fisheye lens. I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, maybe 10 to 14 millimeters, perhaps. Chromatic aberration is really standing out in these high contrast areas. You can see that green fringing up the side, up the rim of the coat and up the shoulder, and the arm and the hat, and then the purple fringing along here. I like this image a lot. I love that you have all this dirt in the foreground here, and the intensity is just right here. I like this a lot. Focus is great. I wouldn't say focus is great. Maybe I got a little vigorous on that. Focus could definitely be better. Clarity is punched up in this, that's for sure. I definitely want to see better focus in this image though. When I double click on this and it goes into 100%, I definitely want to see a sharp image. Overall composition is fantastic. I really enjoy it. Thank you for making this image. And With that, that is our final image, and I'm going to go ahead and announce the winner, and that winner is right here, Rick Hebert. Rick, thank you for making this image. I'll be touching base with you, and we will get that portfolio scheduled. So thank you all for participating, and look forward to April's challenge.